According to later accounts, Brooke Lee West was said to mirror her father's ruthlessness, removing anyone who stood in her way. The moment a person resisted what she wanted, their safety reportedly vanished. A district attorney would later label the crime tied to her as the most revolting, the strangest, and the most unusual of his career, and the case quickly seized national attention. This is the unsettling story of Brooke Lee West and her eccentric family. To support the channel, please like the video, try the hype feature, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. Your support truly helps. Thank you. On the 5th of February 2001, a warehouse manager in Las Vegas called police after a rancid odor began seeping from a storage unit. Unable to reach the renter and alarmed by the smell, he cut the lock and opened the door. Responding officers found a sealed plastic trash barrel inside, leaking an odd liquid and saturating the unit with a putrid stench. Subsequent examination revealed the container held a human body in an advanced state of decomposition. At first, officers believed the remains belonged to a child because of the small size. When the barrel was opened and the plastic layers were unwound, however, the body proved to be that of a frail, elderly woman. Inside the same storage unit, a purse held identification for a woman named Christine Smith. Investigators also logged 2 books found there: the Satanic Bible and Geography of Witchcraft. After forensic work and a check against missing person reports, detectives concluded that Smith had been missing for 3 years. A plastic bag had been placed over the victim's head, suggesting death by suffocation or asphyxiation. Because the remains were badly decomposed, the precise cause of death could not be pinned down. Christine Smith was reported to have been born in 1932, during the Great Depression, to Eastern European immigrant parents. Her early years were described as harsh, marked by deep poverty. The family was said to have survived through troubling means. According to later accounts, her parents effectively sold their daughter's services, forcing the teenager to satisfy adult men. Here is the rewritten version of the text, following all of your guidelines. Christine's formal education was cut short at the age of 13. Perhaps in an attempt to find stability or an escape, she entered into marriage when she was only 16 years old. This decision, however, did not lead to a better life. The marriage quickly proved to be an incredibly harmful and toxic environment. It is understood that her new husband continued the same patterns of abuse she had experienced from her parents. The young woman was reportedly forced into prostitution by her husband, a man she later described as a gangster. This experience left her feeling humiliated and filled with anger, yet she remained terrified of him. This terrible situation persisted for about 2 years before she found a way to escape the marriage and move on. Sometime later, Christine entered into her second marriage with Leroy Smith. He was a man with a varied background, having served as a U.S. Army veteran and later as an officer in the El Paso Police Department. They began a new chapter together and had 2 children, a daughter named Brooke and a son, Travis. Their life took another turn when Leroy lost his position with the police force. In search of better financial prospects, the family decided to relocate to California, hoping for new economic opportunities. Life with Leroy, however, was also far from ideal. He was known to be a deeply controversial figure. He held open beliefs in white supremacy and was reportedly heavily involved in Satanism and other occult practices. This created a difficult and unstable atmosphere within their home. In a tragic way, both Christine and Leroy had histories marked by severe family trauma. Leroy's own past was incredibly dark. He was the son of Russian immigrants who had moved to the United States when he was just an infant. A devastating event occurred when he was only 5 years old. It is reported that he witnessed his drunken father attack his mother with an axe during what began as a simple family argument, an incident that ended in tragedy. According to later accounts, the boy's father allegedly swung an axe and decapitated his wife, who died at the scene. With the father imprisoned for the killing, Leroy was placed in the care of 3 older sisters. His difficulties did not end there. The sisters were said to grow weary of giving up their youth to raise a small child. They wanted independence, not constant childcare. They reportedly put Leroy on a bus with a note claiming he was an orphan, stating that his mother was dead and his father incarcerated, seemingly hoping someone else would assume responsibility. After a few stops, the 5-year-old realized he was surrounded by strangers, stepped off the bus, and began to cry. Unsure of where he was or what to do, a woman noticed the distressed child and took him in. In reality, she had little to offer. Accounts describe her as homeless and struggling with alcoholism. Even so, Leroy lived with her and her companions in a street tent for the next 11 years. As he grew older, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and never saw the woman who had effectively raised him again. At 18, Smith met a contemporary who would later become his wife. At that point, it seemed possible that the lives of 2 young people, both scarred by early hardship, might finally turn towards something better. The couple might have supported one another and found a path to healing, but accounts suggest that never occurred. Soon after the wedding, Leroy left the Army and entered law enforcement. Observers later claimed his difficult childhood appeared to resurface. He was said to misuse his authority and display his badge for intimidation. Commentators argued he should never have become an officer. Reports further alleged that Smith expressed white supremacist views and harassed people of other races. In addition, when detaining individuals on drug charges, he was accused of pocketing cash, keeping the contraband, and reselling it. While on duty, he reportedly targeted women working the streets and demanded their services without payment. Easy access to alcohol and pills was said to feed a growing dependency. Witnesses recalled hard liquor consumed like water and prescription bottles filling kitchen drawers. Christine, for her part, was not portrayed as an ideal partner or parent. Sources suggested she tried to numb trauma with wine, did not hold steady work, and spent long hours in bars, behavior that, by many accounts, enraged her police officer husband. Their household was described as a cycle of drunken fights, public scenes, and bitter jealousy, each spouse determined to be right. Consumed by their own turmoil, neither parent was said to show consistent attention to the children. In effect, Brooke and Travis were widely described as growing up like orphans. Accounts describe a childhood with little guidance or interest from adults. From the start, the children were largely left to manage on their own. By age 7, Brooke's father had reportedly been dismissed from the police for theft. Seeking a fresh start, yet aware his reputation was damaged, Leroy moved the family to Bakersfield, California. The relocation, and the children's hopes for something better, did not bring change. According to these accounts, Christine and Leroy did not secure a house or apartment. They stayed in low-cost motels and after leaving the children in a room went out to drink and socialize, sometimes disappearing for days. In their absence, 7-year-old Brooke was said to care for her 4-year-old brother, Travis, knocking on neighboring doors to ask for food. When the parents returned from binges, the children were reportedly met with taunts and violence. Witnesses recalled frequent bruises and scratches, saying Leroy would seize whatever lay nearby and strike the children with it. Under such conditions, Brooke was sometimes relieved when her parents stayed out overnight. In short, these narratives suggest that the difficult childhoods of Christine and Leroy did not translate into change in adulthood. Instead, old patterns appeared to persist, leaving the children effectively on their own. Accounts suggest the parents repeated patterns from their own upbringings, turning their children's early years into hardship. Adding to the turmoil, Leroy was reportedly unfaithful, and frequent confrontations followed. One night, after another argument, Christine allegedly waited until he fell asleep, then took a gun, pointed it at him, and pulled the trigger. No round was chambered, so no one was injured. She was said to have placed the weapon beneath the pillow and gone to sleep. Whether she intended to punish her husband or already knew the gun was empty remains unclear. Brooke and Travis were described as drifting from motel to motel with their parents, without a stable home and often hungry. Accounts further claim the children were punished and sometimes beaten without cause, leaving both siblings emotionally shattered. In time, the situation reportedly became intolerable, and the couple separated. Leroy, said to be weary of his wife's accusations, many observers considered them justified, left Christine and took the children with him. He had not been portrayed as a nurturing father. Some believed the move was meant to wound his spouse further. Soon afterward, he moved in with a woman, identified as his longtime mistress. Christine did not remain alone. She began seeing a married man named David. The affair reportedly ended quickly. David realized the relationship was a mistake and suggested an amicable split. Christine, however, was said to reject the idea of being cast aside and sought revenge. She arranged a meeting at a crowded bar, ostensibly to talk things through. Aware she might act unpredictably, David arrived with his wife, to whom he had already confessed. They intended to handle the conversation like adults, but witnesses described Christine as furious. Accounts claim she had hidden a firearm in her coat and, at one point, pointed it at David and tried to fire. Police arrested her on charges of assault and attempted murder, and a court later handed down a 14-year prison sentence. Leroy Smith then faced, explaining to the children that their mother would be absent for a long time because she was incarcerated. Brooke reportedly grasped the situation, but Travis, still very young, needed clarity. According to later retellings, Leroy chose deception. He told his son that his mother had died. Worse, he did not deliver the message himself. He instructed Brooke to repeat the lie to her brother, placing the burden on a child to convey news that was both false and deeply painful. When Brooke entered school, classmates who learned that her mother was imprisoned for attempted murder began to bully her relentlessly. Children can be cruel, and Brooke soon felt unsafe both at home and on campus. School, rather than a refuge, only magnified the daily misery and fear. Instead of stepping in to resolve the situation as many fathers might, Leroy decided he had been too hasty in taking custody. One afternoon, he placed Brooke and Travis in the car and drove them to an orphanage. Paradoxically, that choice became the best he ever made. For the first time, the siblings experienced stability, regular meals, quiet nights, genuine concern, and consistent attention from caregivers. 2 years later, their lives were upended once more. Christine, released after serving only a brief term, suddenly wanted her family back. She reconciled with Leroy, and together they arrived to collect the children from the orphanage. Travis responded with a public scene. For 2 full years, he had been told his mother was dead, and the shock of seeing her alive in front of him proved overwhelming. He reportedly could not grasp how his mother had suddenly returned. He also loved life at the orphanage so much that he refused to leave. Witnesses said Travis kicked and screamed until staff and family pulled him out by force. The children seemed to sense that nothing would change at home, and, according to later accounts, that is what happened. After her release, Christine tried briefly to be a better parent, but alcohol soon overpowered those intentions. She was said to drink heavily again and disappear into bars late into the night. When at home, she often lay on the couch with severe hangovers. Leroy, meanwhile, was reportedly unfaithful. Their behavior, taken together, deepened the children's feelings of resentment and worthlessness. In time, Brooke reached her teens, entered high school, and, despite everything, managed to graduate. Afterward, she wanted to live apart from her family. The only option that seemed affordable was military service, so she decided to enlist. According to later accounts, successful military service demands specific traits, and Brooke soon realized the Army was not a fit. Her enlistment was brief, and she returned to her mother's home. Although only a few months had passed, her parents had reportedly quarreled and separated again, this time permanently. Her younger brother, Travis, also left. The young man was described as struggling with mental health challenges. He began using illicit drugs that, by several accounts, were readily accessible in the home and eventually became homeless. After the split, the family's trajectory diverged sharply. Christine turned toward Christianity, expressing regret over past choices and a desire to change. She was said to aim for sobriety and to renounce illegal substances altogether. Leroy moved in the opposite direction. A woman who presented herself as a dark witch entered his life, frequently discussing magic, love spells, and curses. She allegedly emphasized the supposed benefits of devil worship, instructing him on how to cast spells on adversaries and exert control over others. Over time, the relationship with this self-proclaimed witch was said to draw Leroy deeper into a darker world. He began referring to himself as a mage, attending gatherings held in the woman's basement where various rituals were performed. From that point, Christine and Leroy's lives took entirely different paths. As for Brooke, she remained with her mother, though their relationship never resembled a healthy family bond. Having grown up in a deeply dysfunctional household, Brooke struggled to form normal emotional connections. Even though Christine was now devoted to her faith, their relationship swung between hostility and uneasy, calm periods of arguments and resentment followed by short-lived moments of peace. Despite her mother's religious turn, Brooke reportedly became interested in unconventional spiritual beliefs. She stayed in contact with her father and, like him, was said to explore satanic practices. What she wanted most, however, was to escape the tense home she shared with Christine. Soon, she met a young man named Ray, and the two married. The newlyweds moved in together, and before long, they had a child. Financial hardship shadowed their early marriage, and the arrival of the baby brought little relief. Brooke found motherhood overwhelming, her nerves frayed, her patience thin. Interacting with her firstborn reportedly caused deep anxiety and exhaustion. A few years later, unable to cope, Brooke suggested to her husband that they give their child up for adoption. According to later accounts, Ray refused to relinquish his child, and a fierce argument followed. Brooke, described as quick to resort to force, allegedly persuaded her father, Leroy, to help pressure her husband. Soon after, a masked man appeared at Ray's grandmother's door. When the elderly woman answered, she was shot in the chest. The assailant was never identified, but some suspected a connection to Leroy's occult circle. The shooting was believed to be an intimidation attempt aimed at pushing Ray to consent to an adoption, and, by most accounts, it worked. In the aftermath, Brooke and Ray divorced, and she returned to live with her mother. Their relationship did not improve. Mother and daughter appeared locked in a cycle of mutual resentment, yet remained under the same roof. Arguments were frequent. Brooke accused Christine of trying to control her life, while Christine claimed her daughter mistreated her. Ongoing money problems magnified the conflict, and neither woman held steady employment. Accounts even alleged they sometimes resorted to shoplifting food, a sign of how unstable and embittered their household had become. According to later accounts, both women were eventually detained and given 30 days in jail. Another unusual feature of Brooke and Christine's bond was their habit of seeking out men together. One of their regular venues was Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, where they would dress carefully and look for potential partners, a pattern that reportedly continued for years. Over time, Brooke managed to change course. She found stable, well-paid work, purchased a new Jaguar, and saved enough to buy a house for herself and her mother. In 1994, when Brooke West was 41, she met 35-year-old Howard Street John at an AA meeting. He had stopped drinking sometime earlier and was working on his recovery. Within weeks, the two married, and Howard moved in with Brooke and Christine. Domestic life soon turned tense. Christine, for reasons never clearly explained, took an immediate dislike to her son-in-law. Arguments flared over the smallest matters. Christine clashed with Howard. Brooke clashed with Christine. By most descriptions, the household atmosphere became persistently hostile and emotionally exhausting. Accounts describe a breaking point. Brooke grew tired of her mother's demands, especially since she was footing the bills. She bought an old RV, parked it near the house, and told Christine she would live there separately. With nowhere else to go, Christine moved into the motorhome. Despite earning a decent salary, Brooke reportedly spent beyond her means, and, before long, money troubles returned. Unpaid bills stacked up. A payment on the Jaguar loomed, and there was no cash on hand. According to later testimony, Brooke devised an insurance scheme. She allegedly persuaded her husband to help set the car ablaze to claim a payout. Late one night, the two drove the Jaguar to a deserted area and ignited it. The next morning, Brooke reported the vehicle stolen. Authorities soon recovered the burned car, and the insurer issued the couple an $18,000 payment. Brooke, by most accounts, felt relieved old debts could be cleared, and life might feel easier again. Detectives investigating the theft, however, suspected fraud and called Howard in for questioning. Although he reportedly revealed nothing, Brooke panicked. In her mind, the fact that police released him suggested he had confessed. When Howard returned home, she erupted, accusing him of betrayal and launching into a furious tirade that, according to observers, marked a new escalation in the household's already volatile tensions. According to later accounts, Brooke had a pattern of meeting conflict with force. On one occasion, she reportedly drew a gun and shot her husband, Howard, the bullet striking his neck. Bleeding, he ran from the house, shouting for help, and reached a neighbor's door. Police and paramedics arrived soon after. Brooke West was taken into custody on suspicion of domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon, and unlawful firearm possession. Howard received emergency treatment at the hospital and survived, though relief was brief. By the time he was discharged, Brooke had posted bail. Observers said she understood her fate largely rested in Howard's hands. He knew of the alleged car scheme and insurance fraud, and he could pursue charges over the shooting steps he initially took. Later, however, he withdrew the complaint. Accounts suggest he still had genuine feelings for Brooke, and she leaned on that attachment. She apologized for her temper, promised to meet his conditions, and even offered to sign the house over to him, assurances that, according to those familiar with the case, helped diffuse the immediate legal threat while leaving deeper problems unresolved. He believed her promises and trusted that change was possible. He returned home, hoping for a reset, then tragedy followed. Roughly 2 weeks after the shooting, Howard Street, John was discovered dead in the California National Forest. A passerby found his body along a riverbank not far from Brooke's residence. Reports noted multiple gunshot wounds and a plastic bag over his face. Given the recent history, suspicion quickly centered on Brooke West. She was detained, but without direct evidence, authorities released her. Investigators also considered that Howard might have had enemies with motives unrelated to the domestic turmoil, and the inquiry into his death was paused. Accounts suggest Brooke did not cope well with being alone. After losing her husband, she invited her mother back, and the pair attempted a truce. They gathered their belongings and relocated to Las Vegas, using Brooke's insurance proceeds to rent an apartment. Christine reportedly flourished there, making friends with ease, participating in church events, and embracing a busier routine. Brooke, by contrast, seemed adrift. She withdrew, avoided leaving the apartment, and became increasingly irritated by her mother's presence. As stress mounted, Brooke's mental health concerns reportedly resurfaced, and she began therapy in Las Vegas. In sessions, she spoke about early trauma, described long-standing conflicts with her mother that she believed had fueled strife in her marriage, and outlined the strain of her current life. Those who followed the case later portrayed this period as a fragile interlude, one marked by outward attempts at stability and an undercurrent of unresolved pain. According to the therapist's notes, the patient's difficulties appeared to center on her mother. Brooke concluded that something had to change. She was exhausted by the constant strain. In February 1998, one of Christine's new acquaintances came by the West apartment to catch up. When the door opened, Brooke answered. She stated that her mother no longer lived there. Christine had, she said, moved to California to stay with her son Travis and likely would not return to Las Vegas. The visitor was taken aback. By Christine's own account, Travis had been homeless, so the claim seemed puzzling. Even so, the woman asked no further questions, accepted Brooke's explanation, and left. After that day, Christine was not seen again. She appeared to vanish without a trace. It later emerged that she could not have gone to her son not only because of his homelessness, but also because Travis himself had disappeared in 1993, a fact that would only become widely known much later. On the 5th of February 2001, almost exactly 3 years after Christine's disappearance, the manager of a public storage facility began receiving complaints about a powerful stench. Some tenants said it smelled like death. The manager methodically checked unit by unit to locate the source. The odor led to Unit 317, registered to Brooke Lee West. Unable to reach the renter, the manager used a master key to open the space and discovered a plastic barrel inside. What followed drew law enforcement to the scene and set in motion an investigation that would connect the storage unit, the missing mother, and a chain of events that had quietly unfolded over several years. The container, a plastic trash barrel, had been sealed with a tight lid and wound in duct tape, making the contents impossible to see. As the facility employee drew closer, he noticed a puddle of dark, almost black, murky fluid seeping out beneath it. He contacted police immediately. Investigators opened the barrel, and what they encountered was described as overwhelming. Just under the lid lay a layer of dead maggots. Beneath them were human remains. Due to advanced decomposition, many internal organs appeared to have liquefied. Detectives later said the material inside scarcely resembled a body. It was partly solid, partly liquid, and oddly block-like in shape, indicating it had likely been stored for a considerable period. Even with the severe decay, one detail stood out. A plastic bag appeared to have been placed over the victim's head. Beyond that, little could be determined on site. The condition of the remains made it difficult to establish a precise cause of death or an exact timeline for how long the body had been inside the barrel. The scene, according to those present, suggested prolonged concealment and posed immediate challenges for forensic analysis. The identification found in the unit offered the first leads. A medical examiner conducted an autopsy and concluded the remains were those of Christine Smith, mother of Brooke Lee West. Detectives promptly visited West for questioning. She reportedly said her mother had moved to California to live with her son, Travis, but investigators found no evidence supporting that claim. Officials also determined that West had been cashing her mother's Social Security checks without authorization. A latent print matching West was recovered from the duct tape sealing the barrel. On the 5th of September, 2001, she was arrested on suspicion of murdering her mother. Confronted with the accumulating findings, West maintained that Christine died of natural causes. She said she panicked, placed the body in a trash barrel, and transported the plastic container to a rented storage unit. At that stage, investigators had little more than circumstantial evidence and hoped Brooke would admit to killing her mother. She did not. She consistently maintained that Christine died in her sleep during a brief trip after they stopped at a motel. The next morning, Brooke said she discovered her mother unresponsive, panicked, and had no idea how to proceed. She feared officers would dismiss her account and blame her for the death, particularly given the prior suspicion surrounding the killing of her husband, Howard Street John. Brooke insisted she had never harmed Christine. She acknowledged that concealing the body and telling no one was a grave mistake, but she denied causing her mother's death. To detectives, the narrative sounded implausible, and they rejected it. Even so, time appeared to favor West. 3 years had elapsed, and the medical examiner reported that the advanced state of decomposition prevented a definitive ruling on Christine Smith's cause of death. Items found in the storage unit, including books on witchcraft and devil worship, were interpreted by some as suggestive of ritual elements, though they offered no direct proof of how Christine died. Investigators soon set aside the ritual theory, and Brooke also denied any link to dark forces. The case might have stalled there were it not for testimony from Neil Haskell, a forensic entomologist at Street, Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana. He explained that, in typical circumstances, blowflies are the first insects to reach a body, often within minutes, kicking off decomposition. Yet his examination found no blowflies associated with Christine's remains. Instead, most larvae were identified as coffin or graveyard flies, species that usually arrive later, after the earliest stages have passed. To narrow the timeline of Christine's disappearance, Dr. Haskell analyzed the insect larvae floating atop the barrel's liquid. At first, he was puzzled and disappointed by the absence of early arriving blowflies. Then the likely reason became clear. The body must have been sealed in the plastic trash barrel almost immediately after death, shutting out blowflies and altering the normal succession of insects. This conclusion suggested not only rapid concealment, but also helped frame when and how the remains began to decompose inside the closed container. That interpretation ran counter to Brooke's account. A more plausible reading, according to investigators, was that Christine was still alive when placed in the container. In that light, the claim that she died in a motel room seemed untenable. Transporting a body from a motel to a storage unit without allowing blowflies access would have been unlikely. The absence of blowflies was therefore treated as evidence that the remains were sealed almost immediately, an inference prosecutors framed as pointing toward a deliberate killing. The matter proceeded to trial. During the preliminary inquiry, additional allegations surfaced. In 1996, while Brooke's father was undergoing cancer treatment, he was in a relationship with a woman named Diana, who later reported that Brooke shocked her with a stun device and tried to force her to the ground. Diana said she escaped. Investigators also noted a potential financial motive. Records indicated Brooke had cashed her mother's Social Security checks approximately $1,000 per month for 3 years, and she had allegedly attempted to access benefits tied to her younger brother, Travis. Travis had vanished in 1993. Although his remains were never found, questions arose when someone using his Social Security number reportedly registered at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. Taken together, these findings were presented as part of a broader pattern the state argued was inconsistent with Brooke's explanations and, in their view, supportive of the prosecution's theory. Mail related to the hospital visit was reportedly sent to Brooke's address. Although Travis's body was never recovered, investigators looking at what they believed happened to Christine suspected Brooke might also have been responsible for her brother's fate. The inquiry into Travis's disappearance continued, but detectives said they lacked sufficient evidence to proceed, as in the case of her husband, Howard Street. John, Brooke faced suspicion yet avoided charges on that front. Her own prosecution moved forward in mid-2001. In July, a jury found Brooke Lee West guilty of the premeditated murder of her mother, Christine Smith, and she received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Christine was 65. Friends described her as warm and upbeat. Her harsh childhood clearly shadowed her adult years, and she made serious mistakes as a parent. Later, she embraced faith and tried to change course. Prosecutors argued that Brooke, harboring long-standing grievances, ended her mother's life in a brutal manner. In 2004, West sought a new trial, again asserting that Christine had died naturally in her sleep. The state countered that the evidence was sufficient to sustain the verdict. West's appeals were ultimately denied, and the judgment remained in place. In the public record, Brooke Lee West stands convicted of one heinous crime and suspected by some of 2 more. The sentence was meant to keep her incarcerated for the rest of her life, though West, according to later filings, did not accept that outcome. Early one morning in 2012, as inmates headed to breakfast, West reportedly disguised herself, altered her appearance, and attempted to exit the women's prison by blending in as a visitor. Around 6:30 a.m., staff noticed her at the security gate near the visiting area. She was stopped just steps from the main entrance, only meters from the freedom she sought. Commentators have argued that Brooke Lee West was not born a monster, but shaped by a deeply dysfunctional upbringing. It is difficult to ignore the role Christine may have played in that trajectory. The parents themselves appear to have carried significant psychological wounds that were, in turn, passed on to their children. Even so, observers note that Brooke also harbored her own destructive impulses. By the time of the crime for which she was convicted, West was an adult legally responsible for her choices and accountable for their consequences. If you've stayed with this story to the end, you're likely a true crime enthusiast. Consider subscribing to the channel, turning on notifications, and leaving a like. See you in the next story.